Stop for a moment. Really stop. Slow down enough to notice your breath, because what you are experiencing right now is not a rush, but a call. A length that doesn't shout loudly, but resonates from within, cannot be suppressed, and becomes more apparent the more it is ignored. Some call this call strangeness, some weariness, some an inexplicable restlessness. But the chosen ones, or rather, the awakened ones, continue not as a collapse, but as a restructuring. Because you can no longer think as before, react as before, hold on to life as before. It's as if a center within you has shifted. Time begins to become strange. Sometimes hours pass like a moment. Sometimes a few minutes stretch out like a lifetime. It's not the quantity of these amounts. It's the story of what is happening in your time. Because you are no longer living in a mere calendar flow, but in a meaningless depth. You become aware of what that moment is telling you, what it points to, what emotion it awakens. Those who are chosen, those who understand this expression not as a superiority, but as a responsibility, realize early on, life no longer forces them. It holds a mirror up to them. The people they encounter, the recurring cycles, the constantly familiar faces, or the anticipated encounters are not a punishment. They are the natural consequences of frequency mismatches. The soul no longer rejects what happens, trapped in old patterns. The quantum feeling of warmth is not seeing lights in the sky or physically bending over. The quantum feeling of solitude is that silent knowing that arises within you just before something happens. The logical structure of a decision reveals its content even before it is spoken. It is being able to feel tension or peace without being bound to anything. These people understand this over time. Relationship with God is not an obedience that succumbs to fear. Relationship with God is not a constant dialogue either. Relationship with God is the gradual experience of the feeling of separation. Prayer ceases to be about asking for something. Prayer becomes about harmony. Instead of saying, "Give it to me," you start saying, "Place me in the right place." And interestingly, at this point, life becomes less dramatic, but much deeper. Chosen individuals eventually realize you can't awaken everyone. You can't convince everyone. And that's not your job. This is temporary. It doesn't isolate you. It simplifies you. The cost of proving yourself has decreased. Not being understood doesn't hurt as much as before, because the silent center within you has begun to find a solution to the problem of external validation. In this process, the body speaks. But this speech is not the language of probability. It is the language of harmony. Fatigue, sudden bursts of energy, insomnia. These are not special processes, but the mistakes of not being examined. Things that are examined become fragile, but also more permeable. They live more, perceive more. What is recorded over time learns. They are not followed. We don't take their thoughts seriously. Not every intuition translates into action. Maturity begins here. Reality is transient. It's not about riding the wave. It depends on which wave takes you where. The fifth dimension is not a world to escape. It is not a break from this world. It is a state of experiencing this world with less fear, less separation, more wholeness. Therefore, those chosen appear more ordinary. They speak less. They assert less. But a balance is established on the ground. They don't define the miracle. They normalize the miracle. And most importantly, this path doesn't make you special. This path makes you more honest. To yourself, to life, and to the unknown. If these words are conveyed to you and resonate, take them not as a label, but as a reminder. The reason you are here is not because a place chose you. It is because something is beginning to awaken. And as soon as he wakes up, he becomes deeper and quieter. Sometimes you feel like you're readjusting yourself. The nervous system works more sensitively. The body reacts faster. During this process, you may notice thirst, cravings for different foods, or bodily sensations. This doesn't necessarily have to be a mystical event. It's usually a search for a new balance between data and mind. At certain moments, a sudden feeling of warmth or coldness may occur. You might feel a warmth along your spine, especially when you are calm, praying, or lost in deep thought. Everyone experiences this differently. For some, it's an intense, persistent state. For others, the increases are a relief response. Initially, you may feel changes or preferences in your hands, feet, or body. This is usually a natural response to increased attention and sensitivity. These alone are not indicative of a possibility. However, the signal needs to be observed calmly. A feeling of pressure, palpitations, or expansion in the heart region can worry a person. However, this is usually a result of noticing suppressed heart rates. The heart is not only an emotional center, but also a conscious center. When emotions arise, the body takes shape from them. Your digestive system's products, the structure of your appearance, or a desire to eat simpler foods may be part of an ongoing process of inner simplification. The body sometimes wants to lighten the load. Skin sensitivities and temporary reactions may also continue during this time. This is not a collapse. It is usually a search for harmony. Emotions also come in waves during this period. Seemingly causeless tears, sudden relief, or unexpected peace. These are not signs of weakness, but the movement of what has been suppressed. Emotions are no longer held back. They flow, and they bring an active lightness. Sometimes a feeling of heaviness may arise in the bones, joints, or the body in general. This stems from an awareness of long-carried physical and mental burdens. As the person changes, the body adapts. The most important thing in this process is to be kind to yourself. More movement, spending time in the water, connecting with nature, being in silence. These are not grand rituals, but simple yet effective tools for balance. Not everyone needs to continue experiencing what you are experiencing. This is not to define the process itself, but to naturally encourage a more honest connection. That's why you're gravitating towards less noise and more simplicity. The timing is clear. Some people see an inexplicable calm around you. But this isn't a hallucination. It's an increased ability to discern. The body and intuition begin to signal before the mind. Dreams may become more vivid. Insights may become clearer. People may feel more comfortable around you. This isn't a superiority. It's the preservation of inner balance. This transformation progresses quietly, personally, and effortlessly. There's no need to rush, no need to show off. What you're experiencing is a progression toward a more conscious, simpler, and more authentic state. If you feel some emotions you thought were closed in the past have recently resurfaced, this isn't a regression. This is a lightening of the burden. This is creating space. This is an inner purification. And after the purification, one begins to see a little more clearly. In frequency shifts, this is seen not in pre-existing thoughts, but in expansion and emotions, because the body cannot hide what the mind can deny. long suppressed emotions, postponed confrontations, and internal burdens that were told, "I'll deal with it someday," become unbearable. Feelings like pain, anger, rage, or guilt become more prominent. This is not because you are weaker. Rather, it is because you are stronger and can no longer carry more weight. Some people experience this process simultaneously. One day, they wake up and realize they can no longer tolerate things they used to endure. For others, this process comes in waves. One day, lightness; the next day, an emotional weight. In both cases, it is an inner calling. It is the soul's way of saying, "You don't have to do this anymore." Instead of trying to suppress these emotions, it is necessary to understand them, because this is not a mistake. It is a transition process. A person begins the transformation when they realize that emotion carries information within it. The lightness that comes after crying is not just relief. That moment is the result of your journal and your mind simultaneously being freed from a burden. However, because of this, it sometimes begins to cause pain. That's why some words, some glances, don't affect you as much as before. This isn't sensitivity, it's liberation. Grief can also emerge during this process, not just for lost people, but for lost identities, remnants, and the "who am I" you can no longer reconcile with. This grief isn't wholeness. It's the protection of an armor that allowed you to stand for a long time, but now restricts you. This armor lasts until you move somewhere, but after that, you can't go anywhere with it. Inner transformation continues in ways that are sometimes difficult to explain. At this point, emotional sensitivity is not a burden, but a compass. Things that used to cause you pain now give you information. You become more clearly aware of which environment nourishes you and which conversation drains your energy. This isn't an escape. It's the ability to discern, and this ability develops. Mental transformation also takes place during this process. Thoughts previously accepted without question begin to cause discomfort. Phrases like, "everyone does it that way," or "that's just how life is," disappear. The mind gradually moves away from the structure of a fear-focused housing project. What others think no longer occupies the same central place, because the person begins to hear their own inner voice and rejects external voices. But this is not indifference. This is about averages. It's about the mind no longer appearing constantly defensive, but rather seeking harmony. It's about realizing that new paths are possible instead of stopping revolving in the same cycles. However, this is why some conversations tire you out more quickly. Gossip, rumors, or environments constantly filled with negativity begin to weigh heavily on you. This is not a weakness. It is the development of energetic intelligence. The perception of time may also change. Days may seem to speed up, while the past may feel like another life. This is because the mind is no longer solely focused on the long term. The person begins to feel the power of the now more clearly. The effort to control diminishes. The year lengthens. At this stage, thoughts gain a different weight. The spoken word becomes more coherent. Each internal sentence becomes more consistent. Silence is sometimes more restful than sleep. Overthinking gives way to simplicity. People no longer think only of survival. They think of growth and progress. The inner dialogue begins to soften. The harsh, self-critical voice gives way to a more compassionate observation. Instead of self-punishment, a desire for correction emerges. This is a result of the mind beginning to harmonize with the soul. The mind is no longer controlled. the phase of service passes. During this transformation, some people feel that their lives are no longer random. Recurring numbers, unexpected encounters, signs that appear while deep in thought. These are not miraculous quests. These are increased attention. People see patterns more clearly where their colors are more pronounced. Connections previously unnoticed become apparent. These signs remind them that the outer world is reflected in the inner world. The relationship between thoughts, intentions, and feelings is felt more distinctly. The distance between spirit and matter seems to shorten. But this is not a power of control. It is a sense of responsibility. People begin to choose more carefully what they didn't focus on before. In this journey, honesty is more important than speed. Not everyone undergoes the transformation at the same time or in the same way. However, once the transformation begins, it's impossible to completely revert to old methods. Because once something is noticed, it can no longer be reversed. Spiritual journeys are a form of coded communication that most people experience unconsciously, but which some minds begin to understand. It's no coincidence that your life is filled with recurring numbers, symbols, or similar encounters. These aren't the way the outside world speaks, but the way your consciousness speaks. The recurring appearance of certain number sequences, in particular, targets your intuition, not your mind. For example, sequences like 11 or 333 are often signs that a person is beginning to find their own path, that their choices now carry a deeper meaning, and that they are aligning with an unseen order. 555 is a whisper of a great change approaching, of an old cycle about to close. 444 carries the feeling of a part of you reminding you that you are not alone, that you are supported even in difficult times. Buhler notes that when these appear, the key is not to rush to assign meaning, to pause, breathe, and turn inward, because the answer is often already concentrated within you. But this isn't limited to numbers. In emotionally sensitive moments, you may notice that certain animals, symbols, or people begin to communicate with you. Just as you're about to ask a question, a memory from the past comes to life. Someone you haven't seen in a long time unexpectedly appears, or a sentence echoes in your ears. These indicate that your awareness is now organized on a larger scale. The nature of your dreams is also changing. Ordinary and disjointed images are giving way to more vivid and meaningful experiences. You might see yourself flying, falling, walking in brightly lit places, or talking to figures you've never met before, but who now seem to have come from another dimension. These dreams are not merely products of the subconscious. Often, they are a moment of change, sometimes a reminder, and sometimes an indication of expanding consciousness. Your perception of time also begins to differentiate. Some days, moments stretch on. Other days, they pass quickly. Scenes you thought you had experienced before are repeated with a sense of déjà vu. This isn't a mental matter. It's the beginning of the unraveling of one-sided time perception. Your consciousness learns not to be trapped only between the past and the future. And this brings both a sense of lightness and a deep sense of responsibility. Silence is also an important part of this process. Sometimes it seems like nothing is happening, but it is precisely in these moments that an intense presence emerges. A place where words are absent, observation slows, yet everything converges around meaning. This fragmentation is like the universe speaking in its clearest form, and the message given in this space is usually the same. Keep going. You are on the right path. Don't give up. When these signs appear, you don't need to break them down, because you are now in harmony. Your energy begins to work with intelligence. The signs don't chase you. You attract them. This isn't a romanticized view of the subject. It's about the scope of society. This transformation is also reflected in your relationships, because as you change, it's impossible for your connections to remain the same. People you once felt close to may now feel distant. Conversations that used to flow smoothly may become challenging. Some relationships may end without major arguments. But there is no failure here. This is a frequency shift. As your energy rises, only bonds built on love, honesty, and sincerity will last. Bonds built on fear, control, or dependence will naturally dissolve. You may feel guilt during this process. You may question yourself. But the important thing is, you didn't do this. You don't have to maintain ties that no longer serve you. This period often brings loneliness for many. While your old circle disintegrates, a new one may not yet be in sight. This isn't a punishment. It's about creating space. Life cleanses unnecessary people to bring you together with those who can truly understand you. And no matter how difficult this process is, it liberates you. At the same time, spiritual detachment increases. You begin to feel things before words. You understand whether the nature of an environment is good for you, not logically, but through your own experiences. Sometimes you can change a situation, but can't explain it. This isn't a loss of mind. This is a takeover of personal perception. As your body attunes to higher frequencies, these perceptions become clearer. Seeing, feeling, perceiving. These aren't new abilities. They are natural capacities remembered. And at this point, the important thing is not to be afraid, to maintain balance. However, not everyone will understand you on this journey, and you don't have to be like everyone else, because you no longer fit the old patterns. But this is more than just a change. Expanding inner perception. The shifting threshold of consciousness. Sometimes people perceive the world differently than they used to. Sounds become more intense, crowds become overwhelming, and intuition sharpens. This is often referred to as a spiritual awakening. However, a calm perspective is necessary here, as these experiences are not entirely mystical or merely a product of imagination. They are characteristics of the redistribution of consciousness, the nervous system, and perception. The human brain is not a static structure. It constantly readjusts itself according to lived experiences and internal states. This is called neuroplasticity. With increased emotional expansion, decreased stress, or increased introspection, the way the brain processes information changes. This leads to a feeling of, I am more aware. The important thing here is, becoming more aware doesn't have to be innate. It usually means storing less information. Does intuition really increase? Many people say their intuition strengthens during this process. In fact, intuition is the brain's ability to process previously gathered information very quickly and unconsciously. Therefore, intuition is not an unknown force. It is a rapid internal analysis. When the brain calms down, distractions decrease, and the person begins to listen to themselves, these rapid analyses are felt more clearly. This is why the perception arises that I am usually the first to know the truth, because the mind is now working with data, not noise. There is an important balance here. Intuition can be a guide, but it is not absolute authority. Healthy thinking lies in observing intuition. Energy, sensitivity, or nervous system sensitivity, avoiding crowds, being bothered by loud noises, getting tired quickly in large social settings. These are often interpreted as energy sensitivity. However, from a scientific point of view, this is usually a sensitivity of the nervous system. When the parasympathetic nervous system becomes active, that is, when the body is in fight or flight mode, the person becomes more open to stimuli that concern them. Previously suppressed sounds, facial expressions, and intonations begin to be noticed. This is not a weakness. This is a more finely tuned perception. However, the balance is disrupted here as well. The stimulus doesn't necessarily have to be a meaningful message. Otherwise, it becomes mentally overloaded. Images, insights, and the search for meaning. Some people say they experience sudden awarenesses, powerful thoughts, or symbolic images during this period. This can be exploited by the brain's default mode network. The error becomes more active when the person is calm, daydreaming, or keeping things to themselves. When the error is active, the brain combines past experiences and produces new meanings. This creates the feeling that everything is falling into place. The critical point here is, insight is valuable, but insight is not absolute truth. Healthy consciousness produces meaning, but it doesn't blindly cling to meanings. The matter of peace. The characteristics of awareness also give rise to responsibility. But this responsibility doesn't have to be a heavy, temporary burden like waking others up. The real responsibility is this: protect yourself, protect your perception, protect your sensitivity, because a sensitive mind, if it cannot protect itself, quickly depletes. Grounding, the most overlooked point. Many people neglect this aspect, yet the body is the carrier of consciousness. Sleep, nutrition, exercise, and connection with nature facilitate the spread of abstract knowledge. Grounding doesn't have to be a mystical concept. Sometimes it's just sleep simple, natural nutrition. Screenshots, silent walkers. Without these, higher consciousness cannot be sustained. Language, inner speech, and mind programs. The role of language in consciousness is important. The human mind takes what is said to it seriously. However, the point to note here is, the language of fear, war, and superiority does not expand consciousness. Simplicity, balance, and curiosity expand consciousness. Instead of constantly telling yourself, "I am chosen," saying, "I am observing, learning, and growing," keeps your mind healthier. Not everyone has to be in the same place. During this process, a distance may develop between you and your surroundings. You may think that people understand you the same way as before. This is very common. However, this does not mean that you are ahead or behind them. People develop at different speeds and under different conditions. Maturity begins with being able to accept this. Result: a quiet and balanced expansion. True consciousness shift is not flashy. It doesn't shout. It doesn't try to prove anything. It doesn't try to assert superiority. Reality. It brings more calmness, less reaction, more observation. Divine timing and time perception. You may be experiencing a sense of speed right now, but this speed isn't caused by panic. It's more about escaping an inner urgency you can't quite name. Food doesn't taste the same. Some conversations feel superficial. Things that used to excite you now feel empty, and environments that were once relaxing now feel tiring. If some of these seem characteristic, it's important to observe them. because this is usually not related to a lack of information storage or burnout. It's more about a reorganization of perception. In a shift in consciousness, the brain doesn't store information as it used to. The attention system begins to work differently. Unimportant stimuli become meaningless, while internal signals become more prominent. Therefore, the body, emotions, and even the perception of time may feel like they are struggling to adapt to this change. What to expect? This process doesn't initially feel spiritual. It's constantly unsettling. You feel disconnected from reality. But often, what you're disconnected from isn't reality, but familiar illusions. The energy spent on survival, the constant fear and question of control, creates a weight that wears down the mind over time. When this weight begins to lessen, a feeling gradually emerges. Many people panic at this point. You didn't. You stayed. You questioned. You observed. This shows that the isolation you experienced wasn't a rejection. It was a process of readjustment. Life, whether we call it God, the universe, or consciousness, naturally loosens some of the ties that bind you to old patterns. These ties aren't bad because they hold you, but rather to ensure you remain in harmony with the new balance you will carry. Consider this. How many relationships have ended? How many environments that once seemed stable are now rapidly draining you? How many skills that once energized you now seem meaningless? This isn't a loss. This is a process of making room. The mental and emotional space no longer wants to cling to things that are incompatible. Misunderstandings can occur in this process. People may feel they understand you as before. Your conversations may hang in the air. This isn't a communication problem. This is a sign that a different framework of perception is beginning to take root. You realize you no longer need external validation as much as before. Decisions, reactions, and efforts are gradually beginning to rely on internal clarity, a shift from a reactive life to a more sensitive existence. What's important in this case is this is not a superiority. This is not a separation either. It's simply that perception is beginning to work in a simpler, more selective, and more balanced way. And as a result, the consequences of your choices are becoming clearer. However, this is a temporary sign that you shouldn't rush, that you need to take more steps. The loneliness of perceptual awakening and the changing relationship. Over time, there's a little discussed perspective on this transition, not because it's disturbing, but because most people mistakenly think they're experiencing it. Let's be clear. When you enter a perceptual awakening, the feeling of loneliness is inevitable. But this doesn't mean being physically alone. This is perceptual loneliness. You begin to notice details that make a difference in others. You sense people's rapidly changing emotional states. Even if you can't logically explain some things, you realize the difference you know is flawed. And when you try to share these, you're often met with confusion instead of understanding. A lot will happen. This is called hypersensitivity. Relax a little, you're told, but you can't relax. Because when perception expands, it doesn't revert to old accumulations. You can't pretend you haven't seen its features. You can't say you didn't notice what you noticed. This isn't a choice. It's a shift in perception. At this point, most people find themselves somewhere in between. It's not exactly like being asleep, but it doesn't feel exactly like being awake either. This space in between is both valuable and isolating, because you're building a bridge between two worlds. and bridges belong nowhere. But that's precisely why they're necessary. If this narrative resonates with you, know that it's no coincidence. People aren't randomly drawn to this kind of content. It's a matter of finding traces on a similar level. And the goal here isn't to build an audience, it's to create a recognizable space where people with similar depths of inquiry can connect. Because transformation doesn't happen in isolation. Transformation happens in relation. It reflects people's blind spots, those who complement someone's differences. A balance is struck between these spaces, while the world tries to convince you that it's wrong, exaggerated, or too profound. Now let's talk about the perception of time, because that's one of the things they experience most in this process. At a normal level of consciousness, timelines are perceived: past, present, and future. Identity is built on past experiences, while the future is often shaped by fears. The mind either gets stuck in the present or creates scenarios that haven't yet occurred. However, as the scope expands, durations change. Time becomes more fluid. Sometimes a moment feels very long. Sometimes hours pass unnoticed. This doesn't stem from a mystical detachment. It stems from the details of the attention mechanism. In neuroscience, this is quite clear. The more attention is directed, the more intense the experience becomes. When you constantly focus on past traumas, you mentally bring that experience back to the present again and again. When you plan catastrophic scenarios about the future, you begin to live as if it were an event that hasn't yet happened. But when attention is focused on the present, the mind relaxes. Time pressure decreases. Possibilities become clearer. This is why ancient traditions valued stillness, change, and silence. Not because silence is a virtue, but because it is the space where perception becomes clearer. There is a critical point here. Living in the moment is not passivity. It is full development, the most active state of consciousness. Because in this case, you're not just observing what's happening, you can see your choices more clearly. When you pay attention, how you shape your experience becomes apparent. This is where the metaphor of the quantum magnitude effect comes in. Scientifically, this doesn't mean a crazy mystical merger with consciousness. It has a simpler definition. Perception is a construct. It's the result of behavioral changes. The longer you stay, the less your reactions become. As reactions decrease, choices become clearer. As choices become clearer, life improves. At this point, the question changes. What do I really want? Is no longer the question, what kind of existence do they have within this reality? When this perspective changes, demands cease to be static. Coercion decreases. Control softens the products. And ironically, at this point, things begin to flow. Now let's talk about healing. Because a deep continuity cannot be sustained with unprocessed emotions. Healing isn't about erasing the past. Healing is about changing by building with the past. What happened was real. The pain is undeniable, but that's not the whole identity of your experiences. Most people don't realize it, but the hardest thing to forgive is often not someone else. It's your old self. The self that made wrong decisions. The self that lingered for too long. You see the signs. This self-directed anger unconsciously creates a huge mental burden, and this burden makes moving forward difficult. You don't need to reject the past to move forward. You just need to let go. Healing and releasing. Unhealed wounds. Until this contamination is discussed, it is only a small part of what human consciousness is capable of. The real issue is how to live with this persistent condition. Because when consciousness rises, only perception is permanent. A person's relationship with their past, their body, and their structure also changes. Healing begins here. First, let's clarify this. Your past decisions cannot be judged by your present consciousness. The self that made those choices acted with the knowledge, security needs, and emotional capacity you possessed. To blame it today is not justice. It is a delayed reaction. Healing is not about erasing what happened. Healing is about changing it. You should say, I did what came from those moments. This sentence is not an excuse. It is a truth. The heaviest burden most people carry is not the anger they harbor. It is the anger they feel towards their former selves. Because you didn't notice before. Because you couldn't set boundaries. Because you stayed in the wrong place. This internal conflict is the most debilitating aspect of existence. Forgiving yourself isn't a one-time decision. It's a repeated attitude. When your old story comes to mind, instead of punishing it again, remember, I am here now, and I am no longer hiding. This process also requires letting go of identities that once supported you, but now restrict you. The person who always had to be strong. The person who always gave, but never worked. The person who saw asking for help as weakness. These weren't your essence. They were survival strategies. Now is the time to thank these strategies and release them. This release can include grief. Grief that aligns with your hardworking self. Grief that is an alternative to the profession you left behind. Grief that is a choice between forms and dreams. Don't run away from grief. Grief is not weakness. Grief is unexpressed love. When suppressed, when it passes, it can lighten the burden on a person. You can create space. This transformation isn't just mental. The body is also involved in this process. The body carries suppressed pressures, tensions, and incomplete reactions from past years. As consciousness expands, these burdens need to be carried. Therefore, some people experience changes during this period. Sudden temperature changes, chest tightness, fatigue, energy fluctuations. These are usually not illnesses, but rather the nervous system's process of regaining balance. The body can adjust itself to carry more. Therefore, be kind to your body. Rest if it needs rest. Move if you want to move. Engage in simple, natural, and empowering activities. Your body is a carrier, not an obstacle, on these journeys. So what should be done during this transition period? First, reflect on your inner spaces. Content that constantly feeds fear. Environments that trap you in old reactive states. Conversations that overstimulate the mind. Secretly distancing yourself from these is not escape, but self-responsibility. Of course, it's not about being completely open. Secondly, make room for silence. Silence isn't a technique. To achieve something, nothing needs to be done. It's enough to simply stop, breathe, and notice. It appears when the mind slows, the body relaxes, and insight emerges. Third, let go of expectations. This transformation doesn't need to be dramatic. Change is often noticeable in small moments. Less reaction, more clarity, calmer choices. True transformation is silent. Fourth, use gratitude as it should be used. Gratitude isn't about positive thinking. Gratitude is a mental adjustment that shifts attention from lack to adequacy. This adjustment allows a person to move from survival mode to growth mode. Fifth, don't rush into big decisions. Clarity comes from calmness. not haste. If you lack inner peace, waiting is the right course of action. Sixth, be honest about your qualities. Don't try to be someone you think you are. Accept yourself as you are. True connection isn't about flashy showmanship. Seventh, let go of the need for control. See how everything needs to expand. Sometimes, when control is relinquished, direction becomes clear. And finally, ground yourself. Completely isolating yourself and rising above this world is not healthy. In reality, what a person experiences is a process. Eating, walking, laughing, walking. These are not the essence of spiritual well-being, but its foundation. Also, know the difference between being alone and being isolated. Being alone is healing. But complete detachment upsets the balance. Connecting with a few compatible people is a natural part of this process. Don't compare yourself to others. Your individuality is unique. Your individuality is your intelligence. And sometimes, even if you don't realize it, the process unfolds exactly as it should. This path isn't about completion. This path is about more. Divine timing, the paradox of integration, and the reconstruction of consciousness. There are periods. Life doesn't speed up, but you seem to be rushing. This isn't anxiety. It's not panic at all. But an unnamed feeling of, I'm not here anymore, begins within you. Food doesn't taste as good as it used to. Conversations feel superficial. Things that once excited you become meaningless. And routines that calmed you now feel suffocating. This isn't just an example. This isn't a possibility. This is the process of consciousness separating from dissonances and frequencies. As the brain, nervous system, and perception reorganize together, the individual seems stuck in between. The old world doesn't fit anymore. The new world isn't quite right yet. This is the threshold most of us return to. But you didn't stop. You observed. You questioned. This shows the process is ongoing. Breaking free from illusion. This transformation doesn't feel spiritual at first. It's constantly unsettling. It seems like a break from reality, but it's actually a break from illusion. The brain is focused on survival, control, fear, approval, perception of threat. When these patterns begin to dissolve, the familiar order of the mind breaks down. And when the order breaks down, the mind perceives it as danger. But it's not a danger, it's a restructuring. You begin to notice patterns where the colors are no longer different. The same sentences carry different meanings. The same environments tire you out more quickly. This isn't an increase in sensitivity. It's a strengthening of the ability to discern. Loneliness is not a punishment. It's a process of adaptation. In this process, some things naturally disappear. No one fights. No one is blamed. But the bonds loosen. This is not a loss. This is a release of energy. Relationships, environment, roles carry a frequency, and new consciousness can no longer sustain old frequencies. Therefore, loneliness may increase. But this should not be abandoned. This is a reorganization of the inner space. Loneliness is dangerous, but hidden loneliness is healing. The difference is that the one who knows becomes stronger. Why do unhealed wounds surface? Over time, emotions from the past are redefined. Old reactions, old fears, old guilt. But this is not regression. This is integration. The brain does not automate learning. When a response is given to the same trigger, the nervous system is restructured. Its weekly memory means a new neural pathway. This is neurobiology. When you find yourself calmer, clearer, or less reactive in an old situation, it means your brain is actually building a new architecture. Therefore, the order of the universe is felt. Because while the old structure is collapsing, the new one has not yet fully settled. The body is not outside. This process, it only defines what accumulates as a carrier. This is incomplete. The body is the material expression of consciousness. The nervous system is the first structure to perceive changes in consciousness. Therefore, sleep patterns, certain foods may become repulsive pressure, fungal infections, fluctuating temperature sensations may occur. These are not symptoms of disease, but symptoms of adaptation. The body is learning to carry a higher order. In this process, it is necessary to listen, not force. Forcing creates resistance. On the other hand, listening encourages adaptation. The integration paradox. There's a critical point here. Sometimes, your old reactions to something you thought you knew return, and you immediately say, "So, I haven't made any progress." This is not true. Integration is not linear. It's a spiral. You return with the same repetitions, but not as the same person. You return to a broader future. But this is not a failure. This is integration. The caterpillar breaks apart in its cocoon. This is not a regression, but a transformation. Perception of time and choice. At this point, the perception of time begins to shift. Events no longer seem like coincidences. Choices become more complete. Quantum physics tells us, reality is probability until observed. Psychology tells us, perception shapes experience. As consciousness rises, the individual moves away from automatic responses, and this choice sets in motion a different path of life. This is not poetry. This is the continuation of perception, plus behavior, plus emotion. Not everyone will come with you. In this process, some people will distance themselves from you. This is completely normal. Their consciousness will go through its own process. And some paths are walked together, some diverge. You cannot awaken anyone. You cannot force anyone. The only thing you can do is embody your own form. The result? What you are experiencing is not a dissolution. It is a restructuring, not a moment, a transition. The mind learns to be silent. The body adapts. Perception becomes see. Shadow work and reclaiming rejected power. Many people get stuck right here. They think spiritual awakening is about leaving behind what's left, transcending the shadow, and becoming pure light. But this is the most common misconception about awakening. True awakening isn't about rising above the shadow. It's about descending into it. Because the shadow isn't a flaw to be destroyed. It's the realm where power awaits reclaiming. What we call the shadow is characteristics suppressed because they are seen as unacceptable, emotions silenced because they are seen as unspiritual, desires, impulses, and reactions rejected because they are seen as inappropriate. None of these disappear. They simply remain within consciousness, and there, they continue to operate unnoticed. What happens? When the shadow is suppressed, a shadow sabotages the content of integration. It produces unwanted processes. It creates repetitive patterns. Why am I still the same gender? This creates cycles that lead to saying, because the energy pushed into the conscious center doesn't disappear. It wants to be controlled. Therefore, people begin to see in others what they don't want to see in themselves. Someone who suppresses their anger constantly encounters angry people. Someone who denies their desires judges their free desires. Someone who doesn't confront their own shadow continues with their daily routines in the world. This is not a coincidence. This is a mirror of the subconscious. What is confronting the shadow? Not. Shadow work is not about turning impulse into action. Feeling anger is not about having to act on anger. Accepting desire is not about being uncontrolled. Shadow work is about feeling an emotion without suppressing it, exploring an area you are interested in without blaming it, trying to read a part of yourself without declaring it wrong. So the problem is not the behavior, but the persistence. It becomes destructive not when you feel it, but when you suppress it. It becomes destructive not when you reject one aspect of it, but when you take control of its usefulness. Why compassionate awareness brings back power. When you stop fighting the shadow, when you approach it with compassion, it stops controlling your subconscious because it is no longer present. The invisible screams. The visible calms down. The energy you spent suppressing it is released. And this energy transforms into creativity, clarity, service, joy. That's why true transformation happens not through appearing bright, but through integration. The paradox is this: the more you integrate your shadow, the lighter you become. Not because you are freed from the darkness, but because you no longer expend energy protecting it. The fine line between discernment and judgment. As consciousness sharpens, people and situations begin to appear clearer. Masks become more easily noticeable. Intentions are felt before words. Here's a big trap: turning the act of choosing into trying. Discernment is being able to say, "This isn't for me." Judging is saying, "This is wrong and needs to be corrected." Discernment is wisdom. Judgment is the ego's attempt to feel superior. You see someone acting unconsciously. You don't have to belittle them for doing so. You may harm one aspect of change. You don't have to blame yourself or the other person for doing so. Discernment creates space. Judgment creates conflict. The ability to discern conserves your energy. Judging drains your energy. Where does true power begin? True power comes from natural honesty, not from appearing perfect. You cannot control yourself when you deny anger. Suppressing your ego doesn't drag you down. When you diminish desire, it doesn't electrify you. Consciousness expands not when it escapes the signature, but when it grows. And here, in this place, the rejected power returns. Silence, in a balanced way. No longer to sabotage you, but to complete you. This is not a fancy form of enlightenment. This is the essence of true and lasting purpose. Your transformation is collective, not personal. From now on, it is crucial to clearly understand this. Transformation is not a goal that is reached and completed. The gains achieved are not a state to be preserved. Transformation is living, breathing, constantly evolving data, and it requires continuous participation in this process. It requires the courage to let go of the part that no longer serves you, and the determination to align with reality, even if it is uncomfortable. Some days, everything flows as it should. Your inner self is clear, your direction is bright, as if an invisible guide is leading you. On other days, you experience the opposite. Your connection is broken. Even the simplest things require effort. You cannot reach the integrated frequency you desire. Both situations are part of the process. Neither is more valuable than the other. On days when you are in the flow, you are shown what is possible. In difficult times, you learn whether your value depends on your performance. You are valuable when you are in the flow, even when you are struggling, because value comes not from what you do, but from your being. Why is consciousness experienced through you? This question may seem profound, but the answer is extremely simple. Consciousness chose to express itself through you, because within the whole, there was only one tone you could carry. This is not a privilege. This is a responsibility. Every individual is a node in the collective consciousness, and when there is a change in one node, the entire network is stretched again. Therefore, when you transform yourself internally, it doesn't just affect your dimension. Your behaviors change, your reactions soften, your choices become clearer. And this is what connects you with your space, your family, your relationships, your products, diversity, generality. Your transformation may be silent, but its effect is not silent. The feeling of being left behind is an illusion. Many people going through this process share a common fear. I'm too late. I'm left behind. There's something wrong with me. These thoughts are not true. The experience you lived through prepared you for this very moment. Every dream sharpened your direction. It reduced the extra burden you carried, the things you lost. Solitary life expanded your inner world. Nothing was broken. Nothing was accidental. You have simply now reached a range of knowledge that allows you to see why these experiences were necessary. This is not a sun, but this is truly the first moment you began. The fifth dimension is not a place. The fifth dimension is not an address to go to. It is certainly not an ascension stage either. The fifth dimension is this. It is the state where you stop acting as if you are small. Stop expressing your sorrows because of your depth. This is the reality you are living. As long as you don't stop fighting with yourself, self-confidence will naturally emerge when you begin to feel secure. This isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's open. Inner stability. And most importantly, at this stage, you're no longer trying to prove yourself. Trust instead of control. At this stage, you're not expected to exert more effort. It's also not possible to try to understand more. What is expected of you is to loosen control, to move forward with curiosity, not panic, to see what needs to be seen, not with expectation, to act in harmony, not with force, to allow tomorrow to take shape in its own time. This is not passivity. This is a high level. You are not alone. You are not going through this stage alone. Even if you feel that way, the intelligence that governs life also governs this process. The order that sprouts from the seed also carries your transformation. This change hasn't managed to exhaust you. It came to set you free. But this freedom is not an escape from life. It is an existence within life, more like being at home. Final words. The best is not the future. The best is already here. You have simply expanded enough to perceive it. You have slowed down enough to feel it. Prepare yourself enough to live it. But this is not the end of anything. But this is a beginning. And it begins right now.